While I buried my 9-year-old son alone, my family drank champagne across town. I stood there watching the dirt hit his small casket, completely broken. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. It read, "Stop being dramatic, Mason. This is urgent. Come over now." She wasn't calling to comfort me. She meant my dead son's $850,000 trust fund. They had a wedding to pay for, and they thought they could crush me to get it. They had no idea I was about to destroy their perfect lives. Thank you for being here. Grab a warm glass of water, sit down, and listen as I tell you the whole story. The casket was small. That is the first coherent thought that ripped through my mind as the cemetery workers operated the mechanical pulley system, lowering Caleb into the dark earth. My 9-year-old son. My entire world. The wind whipped across the empty graveyard, cutting through my thin black suit, but I barely felt the cold. I just felt numb. My hands shook violently at my sides. I shoved them deep into my pockets, my fingernails digging into my palms until the skin nearly broke, trying to ground myself in physical pain because the emotional agony was too vast to comprehend. I looked around the open plot. It was just me and Elijah, my elderly neighbor who stood a few feet away, leaning heavily on his wooden cane, his eyes red and weeping. That was it. No aunts, no uncles, no grandparents. The people who shared my blood, the people who were supposed to be my safety net, were nowhere to be found. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. It was a reflexive habit, hoping maybe they were just stuck in traffic. Maybe there was a massive pileup on the highway. Maybe they were rushing here right now. I swiped the screen to unlock it, and my thumb accidentally grazed the Instagram icon. The app opened, refreshing the feed instantly. The screen illuminated with a burst of bright, saturated colors. It was a photo posted by my brother, Carter. He was standing in the grand ballroom of the Horizon Hotel, a place that charged more for a plate of food than I made in a week. He was wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo, his arm wrapped around his fiancée, Chloe. Surrounding them were my mother and my father. They were all holding up crystal flutes filled with expensive champagne. My mother was laughing, her head thrown back, pearls gleaming around her neck. The caption read, "Celebrating the future with the best family ever. Cheers to the golden couple." The timestamp said it was posted 4 minutes ago. For minutes ago, the minister was reading Caleb's final blessing. For minutes ago, I was dropping a handful of dirt onto my son's wooden box. My stomach violently turned. The sheer audacity of it knocked the breath out of my lungs. I stared at the bright, smiling faces on my screen, and the world tilted on its axis. My own parents, my own brother. Then, a banner notification dropped down across the top of the photo. A text message from my mother. I opened it, my hands trembling so hard I almost dropped the device. "Stop being dramatic, Mason. We have things we need to finalize. This is urgent. Come to the house immediately after you're done there. Bring the legal paperwork." She didn't mean the funeral programs. She didn't mean Caleb's death certificate. She meant the trust fund. The $850,000 college fund my ex-wife had set up for Caleb before our divorce. The money that was supposed to secure his future. My son was not even fully buried yet, and they were already circling like vultures. I locked the phone and slid it back into my pocket. The numbness evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard knot of absolute rage forming in the pit of my stomach. I walked over to the edge of the grave, reached into my coat, and pulled out Caleb's favorite plastic superhero action figure. Its paint was chipped from all the times he had gripped it during his hospital treatments. I dropped it gently into the hole. I stood up straight, the wind drying the tears on my face. The man who had walked into the cemetery was a broken, grieving father. The man walking out was someone entirely different. To understand how my own family could do something this monstrous, you have to understand the hell I walked through for 8 months, completely alone. The nightmare began on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in November. The hospital walls were that awful, sterile shade of pale green that makes everyone look sick. The pediatric oncologist, a weary-looking man named Dr. Evans, sat across from me in a cramped consultation room. The air felt heavy, suffocating. He didn't sugarcoat it. Rare blood disorder. Aggressive. The survival rates were statistics I instantly tried to scrub from my brain. Caleb was sitting out in the hallway, swinging his legs on a plastic chair, completely unaware that his childhood had just ended. I stumbled out of that office in a total daze. The first thing I did was call my mother. I needed her. I was 32 years old, but in that moment, I was a terrified kid who just needed his mom to tell him it was going to be okay. The phone rang 4 times before she picked up. I could hear the clinking of silverware and light jazz music in the background. She was at her country club. "Mason, I'm right in the middle of a luncheon. Make it quick," she said, her tone clipped and impatient. My voice broke immediately. "Mom, it's Caleb. The doctors, they ran the tests. It's bad. He has a rare blood disease. They want to start aggressive chemotherapy tomorrow. I'm terrified." There was a pause on the line. I waited for the gasp, the sudden shift in tone, the promise that she and Dad were rushing straight to the hospital. Instead, I heard her sigh, a long put-upon sigh. "Oh, Mason, please," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You always do this. You overreact to everything. Last year he had the flu and you acted like the world was ending. Doctors love to run expensive tests and scare parents. Just give him some vitamins and let him rest." "Mom, this isn't the flu," I choked out, gripping the edge of a trash can in the hallway to keep from collapsing. "This is cancer. He could die." "Stop being so morbid," she snapped. "Your brother is launching his new tech startup this week, and the stress is already killing your father and me. We cannot handle your manufactured drama right now. I'll call you this weekend. Give Caleb a kiss." Click. The line went dead. I stared at the phone screen until it faded to black. I tried calling my dad next. It went straight to voicemail. I called my brother, Carter. He answered on the second ring, sounding annoyed. "Look, man, I'm reviewing term sheets right now," Carter said before I even spoke. "Carter, Caleb is sick. Really sick. We're at Memorial Hospital," I pleaded. "Tough break. But hey, hospitals give me massive anxiety, you know that? Plus, I can't afford to catch a bug right now. The investors are coming to town. Tell the little guy to tough it out." He hung up. I stood in that sterile hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing violently overhead. My son was sitting 10 feet away, trusting me to protect him from a monster inside his own blood, and my family had just slammed the door in my face. I realized right then that if Caleb was going to fight this war, I was the only army he had. I wiped my face, pasted on the biggest, bravest smile I could muster, and walked back out to my son. I promised him we were going to beat it. I promised him I would never leave his side. And for 8 months, I kept that promise, while my blood relatives vanished like ghosts. The next 8 months were a blur of beeping machines, midnight fevers, and the metallic smell of hospital cafeterias. I exhausted all my paid time off at work within the first month. By month 3, I had to quit my job entirely to become Caleb's full-time caregiver. My salary disappeared overnight. My savings account started draining like water through a sieve just to keep the lights on at my apartment and pay for the medications insurance refused to cover. But in the darkest corners of your life, you find out who your real people are. My neighbor, Elijah, an 80-year-old retired mechanic, became my lifeline. Elijah had hands like worn leather and a heart of absolute gold. When I was too exhausted to stand, Elijah would show up at my front door holding a steaming casserole dish. He would sit by Caleb's bed in the hospital, telling him wild, exaggerated stories about fixing classic cars, just to give me an hour to sleep in the waiting room. Elijah wasn't blood, but he was more of a grandfather to Caleb than my own dad ever was. Then there was Julian. Julian had been my best friend since we were kids playing in the dirt. He was the guy who stood as my best man at my wedding, the guy who promised to be Uncle Julian forever. When Caleb first got sick, Julian came around a few times. He'd bring comic books and play video games with Caleb. But as the weeks turned into months, and Caleb lost his hair and his energy, Julian's visits became shorter. Then they stopped altogether. I call him desperate for 10 minutes of adult conversation just to talk to someone about baseball or the weather, anything other than white blood cell counts. "Hey man, I'm swamped at the firm," Julian would say, the revving engine of his silver Porsche audible through the phone. "This new promotion has me working insane hours. Let's grab a beer next month, all right? Keep your head up." Next month never came. Julian ghosted me. My best friend couldn't handle the inconvenience of my tragedy. The hardest part wasn't my own loneliness. The hardest part was Caleb. He was sharp and he noticed everything. One afternoon, while the 4-pump clicked rhythmically next to his bed, he looked up at me from his coloring book. His skin was pale, his eyes sunken, but they were so clear. "Dad?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Yeah, buddy. I'm right here," I said, holding his small, bruised hand. "Are Grandma and Grandpa mad at me? Did I do something wrong?" The question hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I swallowed the thick lump in my throat. "No, Caleb. No, buddy. They aren't mad at you," I lied, my voice shaking. They live far away and they have to work a lot, but they love you very much." "Uncle Carter doesn't come either," Caleb whispered, looking down at his crayons. "I miss them." I had to excuse myself. I walked into the private hospital bathroom, turned the sink faucet on full blast to drown out the noise, and cried until I was gasping for air. I hated my family in that moment. I hated them for making a dying boy feel like he was a burden. I hated them for their country club lunches and their startup meetings while my son was fighting for his next breath. I wiped my face with a harsh paper towel, looked at my bloodshot eyes in the mirror, and vowed that I would never, ever let them hurt him again. The end came much faster than the doctors predicted. We were in month 8. The aggressive treatments had failed. The bone marrow transplant had been rejected. The cancer was everywhere. Dr. Evans pulled me into the hallway on a Thursday morning, his shoulders slumped, and told me the words every parent dreads more than death itself. "There is nothing more we can do. It's time to make him comfortable." I moved Caleb into a hospice room. I sat in a hard plastic chair next to his bed for 4 days straight. I didn't eat. I barely drank. I just held his hand, counting every shallow rise and fall of his chest. On Friday afternoon, I knew time was running out. I picked up my phone and called my parents' house. My father answered. "Dad?" I said, my voice completely hollowed out. "It's time. The doctors said he only has a day or 2 left. You need to come to the hospital. Please, you need to say goodbye." I heard my father cover the receiver with his hand, but I could still hear him talking to my mother. "It's Mason. He says the boy is dying." I heard my mother's voice, muffled but distinct. "Tell him we can't. The caterer tasting for Carter's wedding is in an hour. We put a massive deposit down." My father came back on the line. He cleared his throat. "Mason, son, listen. This is a very difficult time for you, and we don't want to intrude. Plus, Carter's wedding is coming up, and we are swamped with logistics. We'll pray for him from here." I didn't even argue. I just hung up. I didn't call Carter. There was no point. Caleb passed away on a Sunday morning at 6:14 a.m. The sun was just starting to peek through the hospital blinds, casting a golden glow across his pale face. He took one final, shuddering breath, squeezed my fingers weakly, and then relaxed completely. The monitors flatlined, filling the quiet room with a long, continuous tone. I didn't scream. I didn't thrash around. I just laid my head on his chest and wept silently until there was absolutely nothing left inside of me. I was an empty shell of a human being. 2 hours later, after the nurses had taken him away, I sat in the hospital lobby with Caleb's small duffel bag in my lap. I pulled out my phone and sent a group text to my parents and Carter. "Caleb is gone. He passed away at 6:14 this morning. Funeral arrangements will follow." I sat there staring at the screen. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, a response came from my mother. It wasn't a phone call. It wasn't an offer to rush over and hold her grieving son. It was a single automated Apple emoji, pair of praying hands. Carter replied 5 minutes later, "Damn. Sorry bro, RIP." That was the sum total of their grief. A cartoon emoji and 4 detached words. My son's entire existence, his bravery, his laugh, his 9 years on this earth, dismissed with the push of a button so they could get back to picking out floral arrangements. I deleted their text thread right there in the lobby. I walked out of the hospital into the blinding morning sun, carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders, completely and utterly alone. Which brings me back to the day of the funeral. After reading my mother's callous text demanding I come over to talk about the trust fund, I got into my rusted 10-year-old sedan. The leather seats were cracked, the engine knocked, but it was all I had left. I put the key in the ignition, but I didn't turn it immediately. I sat in the cemetery parking lot, staring out the windshield at the rolling green hills. My body felt like it was filled with lead. Every muscle ached from the months of sleeping in hospital chairs. My brain was foggy, struggling to process the reality that I would never hear Caleb's voice again. But beneath that exhaustion, the cold knot of rage was expanding. They skipped his funeral for an engagement party, and now they wanted to raid the very fund that was meant for his future. I started the car and pulled out onto the main road. The drive to my parents' house took 45 minutes. Every mile marker I passed fueled my anger. I thought about the $850,000. Sarah, my ex-wife, was a brilliant corporate architect. When we finalized our divorce, things were amicable. She got transferred to London for a massive career opportunity. Before she left, she set up that trust fund. It was an ironclad college and future security fund for Caleb. The money was strictly managed. I never touched a dime of it, even when I was dead broke paying for Caleb's treatments, because it wasn't my money. It was his, and Sarah had been very clear about its purpose. I turned onto Oakwood Drive, the wealthy, manicured suburban street where my parents lived in a massive colonial house. The lawns were perfectly green, the hedges sharply trimmed. It was a neighborhood built on appearances. I pulled into the wide, paved driveway. There was my father's Mercedes. There was Carter's brand new Range Rover. And parked right beside it, glistening in the afternoon sun, was a silver Porsche. I slammed on the brakes, throwing the car into park. I stared at the sports car. I knew that license plate. I knew those custom rims. It was Julian's car. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth ground together. Julian, my best friend. The guy who couldn't find an hour in 8 months to visit his dying godson was here, at my parents' house. Immediately after the funeral he also skipped. A new, sickening realization washed over me. This wasn't just a family meeting. This was an ambush. They had assembled a team. They were preparing for a war over my dead son's money, and they had recruited my best friend to their side. I took a deep breath, the air whistling through my teeth. They thought I was weak. They thought the grief had broken me down so much that I would just roll over and sign whatever papers they shoved in my face just to make the confrontation stop. They expected a shattered, compliant victim to walk through that front door. I unbuckled my seatbelt. I didn't bother checking my appearance in the rearview mirror. I knew I looked like hell. I opened the car door and stepped out onto their pristine driveway. I didn't knock. I grabbed the brass handle of the heavy oak door, pushed it open, and walked straight into the lion's den. The house smelled like expensive vanilla candles and fresh polish. I stepped into the grand living room, and the scene before me looked like a staged corporate board meeting. My father, Robert, sat in his leather recliner, a stack of thick legal documents resting on his lap. He wore a crisp button-down shirt, looking more like a CEO than a grieving grandfather. My mother, Elaine, stood by the marble fireplace, nervously twisting a diamond ring around her finger. Carter was sprawled on the expensive cream-colored sofa, scrolling through his phone with a bored expression. And sitting in the armchair in the corner was Julian. He was wearing a sharp navy suit, looking everywhere except at me. "Well," my father said, breaking the silence. He didn't offer his condolences. He didn't ask how the burial went. He just tapped the legal folder. "Have a seat, Mason. We have business to discuss." I didn't sit. I stood in the center of the Persian rug, my arms crossed over my chest. Business? I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. My son is in the ground for less than 2 hours, and you want to talk business. My mother sighed, her classic weapon of choice. Mason, please, don't start with the theatrics. We are all hurting. But life goes on, and we have practical matters to address. The trust fund Sarah set up. What about it? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Carter finally looked up from his phone. Look, bro. You're a mess. You've been out of work for almost a year. You're broke. You're emotional. You are in absolutely no condition to manage nearly $1 million. It's irresponsible. My father stood up and walked over to the glass coffee table, dropping the heavy folder onto it. He slid a silver pen next to the papers. This is a transfer of trusteeship, he said smoothly. You are currently the residual beneficiary and trustee now that Caleb is gone. We need you to sign your rights over to Carter. He has the financial background to manage these assets properly within the family portfolio. I stared at the documents. The sheer sociopathic nature of the request was staggering. You want me to hand over Caleb's money to Carter? I asked, looking directly into my father's eyes. The same Carter who couldn't be bothered to visit the hospital because it gave him anxiety? The same Carter who was drinking champagne while I was burying my child. Carter stood up, his face flushing red. Don't you dare put this on me. My company is going through a critical phase. My wedding is in 2 months. I have real responsibilities, Mason. You've done nothing but sit in a hospital room for a year. You're unstable. Unstable? I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. I watched my son die while you picked out appetizers. And now you want his money to fund your pathetic, fake lifestyle. Watch your mouth, my father barked, his face darkening. This family is in a cash flow crisis. Carter's startup is heavily leveraged. Your mother and I have extended our credit to help him. We need liquidity, Mason. That trust fund is sitting there doing nothing. It's family money, and the family needs it. They weren't even hiding it anymore. They didn't care about Caleb. They didn't care about me. They were drowning in debt to keep up their wealthy facade. And my dead son's money was their life raft. It's not family money, I said, pointing a shaking finger at the table. It's Caleb's money, and I would rather burn every single dollar in a bonfire than give a dime of it to you parasites. The room went dead silent. My mother gasped, clutching her pearls in mock horror. My father's jaw set into a hard, unforgiving line. Carter took a step toward me, his fists clenched, but my father held up a hand to stop him. Mason! A new voice spoke up, soft, calculating. I turned my head. Julian finally stood up from the armchair. He smoothed his expensive suit jacket and took a tentative step toward me. The guy I had shared a dorm room with. The guy who gave the toast at my wedding. Mason, listen to me, Julian said, putting on his best concerned friend face. They're right. You're not thinking clearly. You're drowning in grief. I've seen you over the past few months. You're erratic. You're isolating yourself. You are losing your mind, man. I stared at him, the betrayal cutting deeper than I thought possible. You're taking their side? After everything? Julian ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable but resolute. I'm looking out for you. If you fight this, it's going to get ugly. Your parents are prepared to go to court. They will petition for emergency guardianship. They will claim you are mentally unfit to handle your own affairs, let alone a massive trust fund. They have my support on this. I've seen your decline firsthand. My blood turned to ice. It wasn't just an ambush to pressure me. It was a coordinated legal threat. And Julian, my best friend, was their star witness to my supposed insanity. Why, Julian? I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. Why are you doing this? Julian wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked down at the floor. Carter is doing big things. It's just business, Mason. Just sign the papers and let your family take care of you. I understood immediately. Julian was a mid-level accountant at a firm he hated. Carter was launching a heavily funded tech startup. They had bought him. My best friend had traded my son's memory and my sanity for a corporate job title. "You're a coward," I said to Julian. The words were flat, devoid of anger, entirely factual. Julian flinched as if I had struck him. I turned back to my father. He was watching me with a smug, victorious expression. He thought he had me cornered. He thought the threat of a public mental competency hearing would break my spirit. "If you don't sign this today," my father warned, his tone icy, "we will file the paperwork tomorrow morning. We will drag your name through the mud. We will prove to a judge that you are a danger to yourself and your finances. We will take custody of that trust, and we will take control of your life. Do not test me, Mason." My mother stepped forward, putting a hand on my arm. Her touch felt like poison. "Just do it, sweetheart. It's for the best. We know what's best for you." I looked at the silver pen resting on the glass table. I looked at the legal documents that would sign away the last piece of Caleb's legacy to these vultures. Then, I looked at the four people standing in the room. I felt a strange, terrifying calm settle over my entire body. The fear was gone. The grief was pushed into a tight box in the corner of my mind. I violently shoved my mother's hand off my arm. "File the paperwork," I said, my voice echoing with absolute certainty. I turned on my heel, walked out of the living room, and slammed the heavy oak front door shut behind me, the sound echoing like a gunshot through their pristine house. I practically ran to my rusty sedan. I threw myself into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They were going to sue me. My own parents were going to drag me to court, declare me insane, and strip me of my rights. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands were shaking, but my mind was laser-focused. I didn't need a friend right now. I needed a weapon. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name, David Sterling. David was the high-powered trust lawyer Sarah had hired years ago to set up Caleb's fund. I had only met him twice, but I remembered his sharp eyes and his no-nonsense attitude. He wasn't cheap, but Sarah had insisted on the best. I hit the call button. It was late on a Friday afternoon. I prayed he was still in his office. "Sterling Law," David speaking. A deep, authoritative voice answered. "David, this is Mason. Mason Williams, Sarah's ex-husband. Caleb's dad." My voice cracked on my son's name, but I forced myself to swallow the emotion. "I need your help. Immediately." "Mason," David said, his tone softening instantly. "I received the notification about Caleb. I am so incredibly sorry for your loss. I was planning to reach out next week regarding the trust execution." "We don't have until next week," I said, the words spilling out of me in a frantic rush. "I just left my parents' house. They cornered me. My brother, my parents, and my former best friend. They demanded I sign over trusteeship to my brother to save his failing company. When I refused, they threatened to file for emergency guardianship tomorrow. They're going to tell a judge I'm mentally unstable from grief to seize the $850,000. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I heard the sound of typing on a keyboard. "Mason, where are you right now?" David asked, his voice entirely professional now. The sympathy was gone, replaced by tactical precision. "Sitting in my car outside their house. Drive away from there. Go home. Do not answer any calls or texts from them. Do not speak to them without me present." David paused. "Mason, I need you to breathe. They are trying to use scare tactics because they think you are vulnerable. But they are making a massive miscalculation." "What do you mean?" I asked, a spark of hope igniting in my chest. "Sarah was a very smart woman," David said quietly. "When we drafted this trust during your divorce, she was very explicit. She knew your family's history with money. She knew your brother was reckless. She instructed me to build a fortress around that money." My breath hitched. "What did she do?" "She had me insert a hostile interference clause," David explained. It explicitly names your parents, Robert and Elaine, and your brother, Carter. The clause states that if they attempt to challenge the trust, alter the trusteeship, or claim you are unfit without verified, independent medical consensus chosen by this law firm, they forfeit any and all future claims to the estate, and we are authorized to aggressively countersue for legal fees and damages. I closed my eyes, a tear slipping down my cheek. Even from thousands of miles away, even years after our divorce, Sarah was still protecting our boy. She had seen the monsters in my family long before I was willing to admit they existed. "But David," I said, my voice trembling, "they have my best friend. Julian is going to testify that I'm crazy." "Let them try," David said coldly. "Be at my office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Bring everything you have. Medical records, texts, emails. We are going to war." I didn't sleep a single minute that night. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by 18 months' worth of Caleb's medical files, hospital bills, and journals I had kept tracking his medications. By the time the sun came up, I had 2 massive binders organized chronologically. This was my proof of sanity. This was proof that I had managed complex medical logistics flawlessly while my family was out playing golf. At exactly 9 a.m., I walked into the sleek, glass-paneled offices of Sterling Law. David Sterling was waiting for me in the conference room. He was a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and a sharp, calculating gaze. He poured me a cup of black coffee and sat across from me. "Let's get right to it," David said, opening a thick manila folder on the table. "I reviewed the trust documents late last night. Your position is legally ironclad regarding the money. The issue is their threat of guardianship. If a judge grants an emergency temporary guardianship based on false testimony from your friend Julian, they could freeze the assets and create a massive legal headache. We need to strike first, and we need to destroy their credibility." I slid my binders across the table. I brought everything. Every hospital visit, every prescription, every doctor's note. I never missed a single appointment. David nodded approvingly, leafing through the pages. "Excellent. But I have something to show you that will make your blood run cold." He pulled a single sheet of paper from his folder and pushed it toward me. It was a printed log of phone calls. "My receptionist keeps meticulous records of every incoming call to this firm," David said, his voice grim. "Look at the dates." I scanned the paper. There were 4 calls highlighted in yellow. The numbers belonged to my father's cell phone and Carter's office line. The dates were from 3 months ago. 3 months ago, Caleb was still alive. We were in the middle of trying the experimental bone marrow treatment. I was praying for a miracle. "They called my office," David explained softly. "They pretended to be calling on your behalf. They asked my paralegal detailed questions about what would happen to the $850,000 trust if Caleb didn't survive the treatment, and what the legal process was to remove a grieving parent as a trustee. My staff refused to give them information and flagged the account." I stared at the paper, nausea rolling through my stomach. It was one thing to be greedy after Caleb died. It was an entirely different level of evil to be calculating the payout while my son was still breathing. They had been planning this ambush for months. They were waiting for my son to die. I looked up at David, the last shred of familial loyalty burning away into ashes. "I want to destroy them. I want to expose them for exactly what they are." David leaned back in his leather chair, a predatory smile forming on his lips. "That is exactly what we are going to do. But we need more evidence of their malicious intent. We need them to say it out loud on the record." "How?" I asked. "They won't talk to me without their lawyer now." "They are arrogant," David said, tapping his pen on the table. "They think you are weak. They think they have you backed into a corner. We are going to use their arrogance against them. I want you to invite them to a meeting today. Tell them you are reconsidering. But we aren't going to do it at their house." David leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. "We are going to do it in public, and you are going to wear a wire." We chose a busy Starbucks in the center of town. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the place was packed with college students, families, and people reading books. It was the perfect stage. People with secrets hate crowds. I sat at a corner table, a lukewarm black coffee in front of me. Beneath my jacket, a tiny digital audio recorder was taped to my chest, actively recording. My phone was face down on the table, loaded with the ammunition David and I had prepared. Elijah, my loyal neighbor, was sitting 3 tables away, reading a newspaper, acting as my silent witness. At 2 p.m. precisely, they walked in. Carter, my mother, and my father. Julian wasn't with them. They likely thought they didn't need the muscle if I was ready to surrender. They looked incredibly out of place in their designer clothes amidst the casual weekend crowd. Carter looked smug. My father looked impatient. They pulled up chairs and sat around my small table, crowding me. "Let's make this quick, Mason," Carter said loudly, drawing a few glances from nearby tables. "I have a meeting with my lead investor in an hour. Did you bring the signed transfer papers?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "No, I didn't sign them." My father slammed his hand flat on the table, making the coffee cups rattle. "Mason, we discussed this yesterday. We are not playing games. If you didn't bring the papers, why did you call us here?" "Because I wanted to ask you a question in public," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and measured. "Why didn't you come to Caleb's funeral?" My mother rolled her eyes, leaning in close. "Mason, keep your voice down. We told you Carter's engagement party tasting was scheduled months in advance. We couldn't lose the deposit. We grieved in our own way." I reached for my phone, flipped it over, and unlocked it. I opened the photo gallery. "You grieved in your own way?" I asked loudly. Several people at the adjacent tables stopped talking and looked over. I slid the phone across the table. It displayed the Instagram photo of them holding champagne glasses, laughing. "This was posted at the exact minute they were lowering your grandson into the dirt," I said, my voice carrying across the quiet hum of the coffee shop. "You were drinking vintage champagne while I buried my child alone." Carter snatched the phone, his face turning an ugly shade of purple. "You pathetic loser," he hissed, leaning aggressively across the table. "You think anyone cares about your sob story? My company is bleeding cash. Chloe wants a $250,000 wedding. The trust fund is just sitting there. You don't need it. You live in a dump. Hand over the money, or we will ruin you." "Carter, quiet," my father snapped, realizing people were staring. He turned to me, his voice a low, threatening growl. "You have until Monday morning. If you do not sign that money over to the family portfolio to cover Carter's debts, I will file the guardianship papers. We have Julian's sworn statement that you are having psychotic breaks. We will have you committed, Mason. I brought you into this world, and I will lock you away to protect this family's assets. To pay off your debts," I clarified, making sure the microphone caught every word. "You want to declare me insane to steal a dead child's money to pay off Carter's failed startup. It's family money," my mother hissed venomously. "You owe us. We tolerated you and that sick kid for long enough. I had everything I needed." The audio recorder captured every threat, every admission of fraud, every piece of their vile extortion. I calmly stood up, took my phone from Carter's hand, and looked down at them. "I'll see you in court." I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving them stunned in their seats. Elijah followed me out a minute later, giving me a silent nod in the parking lot before getting into his own car. I drove straight to David's office and handed over the audio recorder. David listened to the playback, his eyes wide with disbelief, before a massive grin spread across his face. "They gave us the murder weapon," David said, carefully extracting the audio file to his secure server. "This is textbook extortion, but they are still going to strike. Prepare yourself, Mason. The next 48 hours are going to be brutal." David was right. They didn't wait until Monday. Sunday evening, I was sitting in Caleb's empty bedroom. I was holding the faded superhero pajamas he used to wear during his chemo treatments, just smelling the faint scent of his laundry detergent. The house was painfully quiet. Suddenly, a loud, authoritative knock hammered on my front door. I walked to the living room and looked through the peephole. A uniformed county sheriff's deputy was standing on my porch. My stomach dropped into my shoes. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. "Mason Williams?" the deputy asked, his face totally blank. "A man just doing a job." "Yes, that's me." He thrust a thick manila envelope into my chest. "You've been served." He turned and walked back to his cruiser without another word. I stood in the doorway, the heavy envelope burning my hands. I went back to the kitchen table, ripped open the seal, and dumped the contents under the harsh overhead light. The bold black letters at the top of the document screamed at me. Emergency petition for temporary guardianship and asset freeze. I started reading, and with every page my horror grew. They hadn't just filed, they had gone nuclear. The petition claimed I was a danger to myself and the public, suffering from severe, unmedicated psychotic delusions brought on by grief. But it was the attached exhibits that made me physically sick. Exhibit A was a sworn affidavit from Julian. My best friend had written 3 pages detailing entirely fabricated stories. He claimed he had visited my house and found me talking to the walls. He claimed I had threatened physical violence against him. He explicitly stated that I was incapable of managing basic finances. Exhibit B was worse. It was a stack of Caleb's highly confidential medical records from Memorial Hospital. Pages of doctor's notes documenting moments when I had broken down crying in the ICU, twisted and presented out of context to make me look emotionally unstable. How did they get these? I was the only authorized contact. I flipped to the back page and saw the signature on the medical release form. Carter. He had used a forged power of attorney to illegally access my dead son's medical files just to weaponize my grief against me. My phone rang. It was David. "Did you get them?" he asked. "Yes," I breathed, my hands shaking as I held the forged documents. "David, they used Caleb's medical records. They got Julian to lie under oath. They're demanding the judge freeze the trust account immediately pending a mental evaluation." "I know," David said sharply. "I just received the electronic filing. The emergency hearing is set for Tuesday morning before Judge Peabody. She's tough, Mason. Very by the book. They are trying to overwhelm us with paper. Can we win?" I asked, staring at the lies printed on the legal stationery, feeling the immense, crushing weight of their power. "Mason," David said, his voice cold and deadly, "they just committed perjury, fraud, and violated federal HIPAA laws in a single filing. They didn't just dig their own graves. They built the coffins. Get some sleep." On Tuesday, we dropped the bomb. Tuesday morning arrived with a cold, biting wind. I walked up the wide concrete steps of the county courthouse, my chest tight, my breath visible in the chilly air. David walked right beside me, holding a thick leather briefcase. He looked perfectly calm, like a predator stepping into his natural territory. I, on the other hand, felt like I was walking to my own execution. We entered courtroom 4B. The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind us, sealing us inside. The room smelled of old wood and floor wax. Across the center aisle, sitting at the plaintiff's table, was my family. My father wore a dark charcoal suit, his posture rigid. My mother had a tissue dabbed carefully at the corner of her dry eyes. Carter sat next to them, looking mildly annoyed that he had to be awake this early. And sitting directly behind them in the first row of the gallery was Julian. He caught my eye for a fraction of a second before quickly looking down at his expensive leather shoes. My blood boiled. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Marion Peabody walked in. She was a woman in her late 60s with silver hair pulled back into a severe bun, and eyes that looked like they could cut through steel. She took her seat at the high bench, arranged her files, and looked down at the courtroom. "I have reviewed the emergency petition for guardianship and asset control," Judge Peabody said, her voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "These are incredibly serious allegations regarding Mr. Mason Williams's mental fitness and his ability to manage a substantial trust fund. We will hear from the petitioners first." My father's lawyer, a slick guy in a pinstripe suit, stood up. He spent the next 20 minutes painting a picture of a broken, deranged man. He talked about my divorce, my lack of a steady salary over the last year, and how the grief of the funeral had pushed me over the edge. Then he called his star witness. The petitioners called Julian Vance to the stand. Julian walked up, placed his hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. He sat in the witness box, looking directly at the judge. "Mr. Vance, you have been Mason Williams's best friend for over a decade, correct?" the lawyer asked. "Yes," Julian said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I was his best man. I love him like a brother. But since Caleb got sick, Mason completely unraveled. He stopped sleeping. He became paranoid. Last week, I went to his house and he was screaming at the walls. He threatened me physically when I suggested he needed psychiatric help. He is completely detached from reality. Leaving him in charge of that college fund is a disaster waiting to happen." I gripped the edge of the wooden table so hard my fingers went numb. He was lying through his teeth without a single stutter. The opposing lawyer smiled and sat down. "Your witness." David stood up slowly. He didn't carry any notes. He walked right up to the witness stand, his eyes locked onto Julian. "Mr. Vance," David began, his voice dangerously quiet, "you care deeply about Mason's well-being. Is that your testimony today?" "Absolutely," Julian nodded. "And you have no ulterior motive for participating in this attempt to strip him of his legal rights?" "None," Julian said, though his left eye twitched slightly. David turned and walked back to our table, picking up a single piece of paper. "Mr. Vance, where were you employed last month?" Julian frowned. "I was a senior accountant at Miller and Hayes." "Were you?" David asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because I have here an employment contract, filed with the state tax board just 3 days ago. It shows that you accepted a new position, a massive promotion, Director of Finance at Horizon Tech Solutions, with a starting salary of $250,000. The courtroom went dead silent. Carter shifted violently in his chair. "Horizon Tech Solutions," David continued, turning to look directly at the judge. "The startup company owned and operated by Carter Williams. The man sitting right there. The man trying to seize the trust." Julian's face drained of all color. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "Isn't it true, Mr. Vance?" David's voice cracked like a whip. "That Carter Williams bought your false testimony today with a $250,000 promotion? Isn't it true you are lying under oath to help him steal a dead child's inheritance?" "Objection!" the opposing lawyer shouted, jumping to his feet. "Overruled." Judge Peabody snapped, her eyes glaring daggers at Julian. "The witness will answer the question." Julian slumped in the chair, sweat beading on his forehead. I just do accounting." David smiled coldly. "No further questions for this witness, Your Honor." The momentum in the room shifted instantly. You could feel the air pressure change. My father's lawyer looked frantically at his notes, realizing his star witness had just been completely compromised. But David wasn't done. Not even close. "Your Honor," the defense calls Catherine Winters to the stand. A middle-aged woman in a neat cardigan walked through the double doors and took the oath. She was the chief records administrator at Memorial Hospital. David approached her gently. "Ms. Winters, the petitioners submitted a stack of highly confidential medical records belonging to Caleb Williams to this court. Can you explain how those records were obtained?" Catherine adjusted her glasses. "Yes. 2 weeks ago, a man came into our records department. He presented a power of attorney form, claiming Mason Williams was incapacitated. He requested the complete medical file for the deceased minor." "And did you review this power of attorney form?" David asked. "Our legal department did after the fact," Catherine stated, her voice firm. "We discovered the notary stamp was completely forged. The document was fraudulent. The man who submitted it committed identity theft to bypass HIPAA regulations." "Do you see the man who submitted the forged document in this courtroom today?" David asked. Catherine pointed a steady finger directly at the plaintiff's table. Yes, it was Carter Williams. Carter practically jumped out of his chair. That's a lie. I was just getting family records. Sit down and remain silent, Mr. Williams. Judge Peabody roared, banging her gavel so hard the sound cracked through the room. One more outburst and you will be sitting in a holding cell for contempt. Carter sank back into his chair, his face pale, his bravado entirely stripped away. My mother put her face in her hands. My father stared straight ahead, a muscle ticking violently in his jaw. David then called Elijah to the stand. The 80-year-old man walked up slowly with his cane. He didn't wear a fancy suit, just a clean flannel shirt. But when he spoke, the entire courtroom listened. I've lived next to Mason for 5 years, Elijah testified, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. I saw that boy every single day. I saw Mason carry his son to the car when he was too weak from chemo to walk. I saw him stay awake for 3 days straight when the fever spiked. He didn't go crazy. He didn't lose his mind. He was the strongest, most dedicated father I have ever seen in my long life. The people over there. Elijah pointed his cane at my family. They never showed up. Not once. They let that boy die without a single visit. And now they want his money. Judge Peabody looked from Elijah to me, her stern expression softening for just a fraction of a second. Then she looked over at my parents. The look she gave them was one of pure, unadulterated disgust. David walked back to our table and placed his hand on my shoulder. He looked up at the bench. Your Honor, David said, the petitioners have claimed my client is mentally unfit, that he is a danger to the assets, and that they are filing this petition out of deep family concern. We have one final piece of evidence to submit. We request permission to play an audio recording, legally obtained in a public venue where there is no reasonable expectation of privacy. Judge Peabody nodded. Proceed, counselor. David plugged his laptop into the court's audio system. He hit play. The high-quality speakers in the courtroom crackled to life. The background noise of the busy coffee shop filled the room. The clinking of cups, the low hum of chatter. Then, my voice came through crystal clear. You grieved in your own way? This was posted at the exact minute they were lowering your grandson into the dirt. You were drinking vintage champagne while I buried my child alone. The sound of Carter snatching the phone echoed loudly. Then, Carter's furious, arrogant voice blasted through the courtroom. You pathetic loser. You think anyone cares about your sob story? My company is bleeding cash. Chloe wants a $250,000 wedding. The trust fund is just sitting there. You don't need it. You live in a dump. Hand over the money, or we will ruin you. My father's lawyer dropped his pen. It clattered loudly onto the wooden table. He put his head in his hands. He knew it was completely over. The recording continued. My father's threatening growl vibrated through the speakers. We will have you committed, Mason. I brought you into this world, and I will lock you away to protect this family's assets. And then, my mother's venomous hiss, the final nail in their coffin. It's family money. You owe us. We tolerated you and that sick kid for long enough. David hit the spacebar, stopping the audio. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. I looked over at the plaintiff's table. They were completely destroyed. Carter was staring at the floor, his chest heaving in panic. My mother was openly weeping, her carefully applied makeup running down her face in dark streaks. My father looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 seconds. They were exposed. The pristine, wealthy masks they wore for society had been ripped off, revealing the ugly, greedy monsters underneath. Judge Peabody sat frozen on the bench. Her face was a mask of cold, terrifying fury. She looked down at my family, her eyes burning. Mr. Sterling, Judge Peabody said, her voice dropping an octave. Is there anything else? No, Your Honor. The defense rests. Judge Peabody turned her piercing gaze to my father's lawyer. Counselor, do you have anything to say in defense of this absolute abomination of illegal filing? The lawyer stood up, his hands shaking. Your Honor, my clients maintain that they were acting out of concern for. Save it, the judge barked. Do not insult my intelligence, and do not further insult this courtroom. Sit down. The lawyer immediately sat down, refusing to look at my parents. Judge Peabody folded her hands on the bench. In my 25 years on the bench, I have presided over difficult family disputes. I have seen greed. I have seen anger. But I have never, in my entire career, witnessed a display of such malicious, calculated, and breathtaking cruelty. She pointed a finger at Carter. You used forged documents to steal a deceased child's medical records to weaponize them against a grieving father. She pointed at my parents. You stood before this court and claimed you were trying to protect your son, when your own words prove you were orchestrating a malicious extortion plot to steal an inheritance to cover your own financial failures. She finally looked at Julian. And you, Mr. Vance. You sold your soul and committed blatant perjury for a corporate title. She picked up her heavy wooden gavel. I am ready to rule. The courtroom held its collective breath. Even the bailiff standing by the door seemed completely frozen. The emergency petition for temporary guardianship and asset control is dismissed with extreme prejudice, Judge Peabody announced, her voice ringing out with absolute authority. The trust fund will remain entirely under the control of Mason Williams. A massive weight lifted off my chest. The crushing pressure that had been sitting on my lungs for days finally evaporated. I let out a long, shaky breath, closing my eyes in pure relief. But the judge was not finished. Furthermore, she continued, her eyes locked on the plaintiff's table, this court does not take lightly the abuse of the judicial system for the purpose of financial extortion. I am formally referring Julian Vance, Carter Williams, Robert Williams, and Elaine Williams to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation regarding conspiracy, fraud, and multiple counts of perjury. My mother let out a loud, wailing sob. My father grabbed her arm, his face completely devoid of color. Carter looked like he was going to be physically sick right there at the table. Additionally, Judge Peabody said, turning her attention to me, Mr. Williams, based on the threats heard in that audio recording, I am granting a permanent, full stay-away restraining order. These individuals are barred from coming within 500 feet of you, your residence, or your place of employment. If they attempt to contact you by phone, email, or third party, they will be arrested immediately. She picked up her pen, signed the heavy stack of documents in front of her with aggressive, sharp strokes, and handed them down to the court clerk. She looked at me one last time. Her stern face softened, and for a moment, she wasn't just a judge. She was a human being witnessing another human's survival. Mr. Williams, she said quietly, no parent should ever have to endure the loss of a child. And no one should ever have to endure the betrayal you have faced from the people who were supposed to protect you. You fought for your son's memory today with incredible dignity. I am deeply sorry for your loss. Court is adjourned. She slammed the gavel down. Bang. It was the loudest, most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of justice. It was the sound of my freedom. As the judge exited the room, the tension finally snapped. The bailiffs immediately moved in, stepping between our table and the plaintiff's table to enforce the new restraining order. David turned to me, a huge, genuine smile on his face. He extended his hand. We did it, Mason. The money is safe. You are safe. They can never touch you again. I shook his hand, pulling him into a brief, hard hug. Thank you, David. Thank you for believing me. I turned around and saw Elijah leaning over the gallery railing. The old man had tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. He gave me a slow, proud nod. I walked over and hugged him tightly. Across the aisle, my family was in utter chaos. Their lawyer was packing his briefcase at lightning speed, actively ignoring my father's frantic questions. What do we do now? Carter was panicking, pulling at his expensive tie. The investors are going to pull out if I get indicted. My life is over. I stood there for a moment, watching the empire of lies they had built crumble into dust. I felt no pity. I felt no sorrow. I just felt clean. David and I walked out of the courtroom and down the wide marble hallway. The heavy doors swung open behind us, and my family spilled out, flanked by the bailiffs making sure they kept their distance. They saw me standing near the elevators. Despite the court order, despite the massive humiliation they had just suffered, their arrogance still drove them. "Mason!" my mother cried out, taking a step toward me before a bailiff put a stern hand on her chest, stopping her. "Mason, please, you can't let them do this to us. We are your family. Carter will go to jail." I turned to face them. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I looked at the three of them with absolute, chilling indifference. "You aren't my family," I said, my voice echoing in the hallway. "My family is buried in the ground. You are just strangers who share my DNA. Do not ever speak to me again." I pressed the elevator button. The doors slid open. David and I stepped inside. The last thing I saw before the metal doors closed was Carter sliding down the marble wall, putting his head between his knees, his perfect life completely destroyed by his own greed. When we walked out the front doors of the courthouse, the crisp air hit my face. The sun was breaking through the morning clouds. For the first time in over a year, I looked up at the sky and felt a genuine spark of hope. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal finalizing. The trust was entirely secured under my name. With David's guidance, I didn't spend the money on myself. I didn't buy a fancy car or a big house. Caleb never cared about money. He cared about superheroes saving people. So I set up a foundation, the Caleb Williams Memorial Trust. We partnered with Memorial Hospital to create a massive financial aid program for single parents dealing with pediatric cancer. We paid for the experimental drugs insurance wouldn't cover. We paid rent for parents who had to quit their jobs to sit by hospital beds. We made sure no parent ever had to feel as alone and desperate as I did. I finally had a purpose. I poured every ounce of my energy into building that foundation. I was working 60 hours a week, coordinating with hospital boards, meeting with desperate parents, and writing checks that literally saved lives. Meanwhile, karma was handling my blood relatives with brutal efficiency. I didn't have to seek them out. Their downfall made the local business news. Once the district attorney opened the criminal investigation for perjury and fraud, Carter's startup collapsed overnight. His lead investors pulled their funding immediately, citing the morality clause in their contracts. Without the capital, the company declared bankruptcy within a month. Chloe, his beautiful fiancée who wanted the $250,000 wedding, packed her bags and left him the moment the money dried up. Julian was fired from his accounting firm. No reputable financial institution will hire a man publicly investigated for lying under oath to steal money. He lost the silver Porsche to repossession. And my parents? The crushing legal fees from their defense attorneys drained their retirement accounts. They had to sell the massive colonial house in the wealthy suburbs and downsize to a small apartment across the state, forever running from the shame of what they had done. 6 months passed. The leaves on the trees turned bright orange and fell to the ground. Winter arrived, covering the city in a blanket of quiet snow. I was sitting in David's office on a Tuesday afternoon, signing the final tax documents for the foundation's end-of-year filings. We were drinking coffee, reflecting on how far everything had come. David closed the thick ledger. "Everything is perfectly in order, Mason. The foundation helped 22 families this quarter alone. You've done something incredible." "We did it," I corrected him. "I couldn't have navigated any of this without you." David smiled, but then his expression grew serious. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a single, thin manila folder. He placed it carefully on the desk between us. "Mason," David said softly, When we were doing the discovery phase for the trial, we subpoenaed all of your parents' financial records to prove their motive of debt. My paralegals combed through thousands of pages. We found this buried in the back of a file last week. I debated whether or not to show you. My heart gave a slow, heavy thump. Show me what? David opened the folder. Inside was an application form with a major life insurance company. I need you to look at the date on this application, David said, pointing to the top right corner. I leaned forward. The date was exactly 2 weeks after Caleb received his terminal diagnosis. Your parents, David said, his voice laced with absolute disgust, attempted to purchase a $2 million life insurance policy on Caleb. They listed themselves as the sole beneficiaries. The room started to spin. The air was sucked out of my lungs. I stared at the signatures at the bottom of the page. Robert and Elaine Williams. They tried to bet on his death, I whispered, the sickening reality washing over me like a bucket of ice water, while I was sitting next to his bed holding his hand, praying for a miracle. They were secretly filling out paperwork to become millionaires when he died. David nodded slowly. The insurance company denied the application immediately, of course. You cannot take out a policy on a child who has already been diagnosed with a terminal illness. They rejected it due to pre-existing conditions. Your parents knew he was going to die, and their first instinct wasn't to comfort him. Their first instinct was to try and cash in. For a long moment, I didn't say anything. I just stared at the piece of paper. A year ago, this revelation would have broken me. It would have sent me spiraling into a deep, dark depression. I would have screamed, cried, and demanded to know how my own mother and father could be so unimaginably evil. But sitting there now, 6 months removed from the toxic poison of their presence, I felt nothing. No anger, no tears, just cold, clinical closure. It was the final confirmation I needed. The tiny, nagging voice in the back of my head that sometimes wondered if I had been too harsh, if I should have offered them a chance to apologize, was silenced forever. They were not broken people who made a mistake out of desperation. They were predators. I closed the folder and slid it back across the desk to David. Shred it, I said calmly. I don't care anymore. They don't exist to me. David looked at me, a profound respect in his eyes. He picked up the folder and dropped it directly into the heavy-duty shredder next to his desk. The machine whirred loudly, turning the last piece of their greed into confetti. Good man, David said. Now let's go check on the real legacy. We left the law office and drove across town to Memorial Hospital. We walked through the sliding glass doors, past the lobby where I had received that awful text message from my mother, and took the elevator up to the 4th floor. When the doors opened, I didn't see the sterile, depressing pale green walls of the past. The walls were painted a bright, vibrant ocean blue. Beautiful murals of sea turtles, dolphins, and coral reefs stretched down the hallway. The lighting was warm and welcoming. At the end of the hall, a massive wooden plaque hung on the wall. The carved letters read, "The Caleb Williams Pediatric Oncology Wing." I walked slowly down the hall, tracing my fingers along the painted walls. We had funded the entire renovation. We had purchased new, comfortable sleeper chairs for every single patient room so parents wouldn't have to sleep on hard plastic. We had installed video game consoles in the treatment rooms to distract the kids during chemo. A young woman in a white doctor's coat walked out of one of the rooms. She saw us and immediately smiled, walking over. "Mr. Williams. Mr. Sterling," she said warmly, extending her hand. "Hi, Dr. Jennifer," I said, shaking her hand. Jennifer was the first recipient of the Caleb Williams Medical Scholarship. She was a brilliant medical student who had almost dropped out of her residency because she couldn't afford the tuition. Our foundation covered her remaining debt on the condition she specialized in pediatric rare blood disorders. Now, she was one of the top attending physicians on the floor. "How are the kids today?" I asked. "They are fighting hard," Jennifer said, her eyes shining with dedication. "We have 2 patients going home this week. Their white cell counts look fantastic. And the new sleeper chairs? The parents haven't stopped thanking us. You've completely changed the environment here, Mason. Caleb changed it, I corrected her gently. I'm just delivering his message. We walked the floor for an hour. I didn't feel the suffocating grief I used to associate with this building. I saw a little boy playing a video game while hooked up to N4, laughing loudly at the screen. I saw a mother sleeping peacefully in one of the new chairs, holding her daughter's hand. I realized then that the $850,000 hadn't just been saved from the hands of greedy people. It had been weaponized for good. My son's life was short, tragically short, but his impact was going to echo through these halls for decades. He was saving lives he would never even meet. As David and I walked back to the car, the winter air felt crisp and clean in my lungs. You did good, Mason, David said, unlocking his car. Your boy would be incredibly proud of you. I know, I said, looking up at the hospital windows. I really think he is. I drove home that night to my small apartment. It was quiet, but it wasn't lonely. Elijah came over for dinner, bringing a fresh pot of stew. We sat at the kitchen table, eating and talking about his old cars. We laughed. I actually laughed out loud. A deep, real laugh from the chest. I looked across the table at the 80-year-old man who had stood by me when my own blood ran away. I thought about David, who fought like a gladiator to protect me. I thought about Sarah, who loved our son enough to build a fortress around his future. That was my family. A year to the exact day of the funeral, I drove back to the cemetery. The wind wasn't howling this time. It was a beautiful, clear spring morning. The grass was bright green, and the trees surrounding the property were beginning to bloom. I parked my car and walked down the paved path toward Caleb's plot. I wasn't the broken, trembling man I had been a year ago. I walked with my shoulders back, holding a small bouquet of bright yellow sunflowers. When I approached his headstone, I stopped. There was someone already there. A woman in her 30s was standing near the grave, holding the hand of a little girl who looked to be about 7 years old. The little girl had short, fuzzy hair, the unmistakable sign of a child whose hair was growing back after chemotherapy. I walked up slowly. The woman heard my footsteps and turned around. She looked startled for a moment. Then her eyes dropped to the sunflowers in my hand. I'm so sorry, she said quickly, stepping back. We didn't mean to intrude. Are you Mason? Yes, I said gently. I'm Caleb's dad. Tears instantly welled up in the woman's eyes. She put her hand over her mouth, her shoulders shaking slightly. Oh my God, I've wanted to meet you for so long. I'm Rachel, and this is my daughter, Emma. Emma peeked out from behind her mother's leg and gave me a shy wave. Emma was diagnosed with a rare leukemia 8 months ago, Rachel explained, wiping her eyes. I'm a single mom. I work as a waitress. When the hospital told me what the copays for the experimental treatments were going to be, I thought I was going to lose her. I couldn't afford it. I was terrified. She reached down and gently touched Emma's shoulder. Then the social worker told me about the Caleb Williams Memorial Trust. Your foundation covered everything, Mason. Every single bill. You paid our rent for 3 months so I could stay in the hospital with her. Because of you, because of your son, Emma is in total remission today. The doctors say she's going to live a long, healthy life. I stared at the little girl. She was vibrant, full of life, holding a small pink teddy bear. She looked at me with bright, clear eyes. We just came to say thank you, Rachel whispered. We wanted to thank Caleb. I felt a massive lump form in my throat, but it wasn't from grief. It was from an overwhelming, profound sense of peace. I crouched down to be eye level with the little girl. Hi, Emma, I said softly. Hi, she squeaked. Thank you for helping my mom. You're very welcome, I smiled. Caleb would be really happy to know you're doing so well. He was a superhero, just like you. Rachel and Emma stayed for a few more minutes before giving me a hug and walking back toward the parking lot. I watched them go, a mother and daughter walking into the future, a future that existed because my son had lived. I turned back to the polished granite headstone. I knelt down on the soft grass. I placed the bright yellow sunflowers against the stone. Then, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a brand new plastic superhero action figure. I set it right next to the flowers. I kept my promise, buddy. I whispered to the quiet morning air. We protected it. And we used it to save the world, just like you wanted. I stood up, taking a deep breath of the fresh spring air. I looked around the cemetery, realizing that the agonizing pain of the past year had finally burned away, leaving behind a foundation of solid rock. Sometimes the universe breaks you down to your absolute lowest point. It strips away everything you thought was real. It exposes the lies, the greed, and the people who never truly loved you. It hurts more than words can describe. But if you survive the fire, if you stand your ground and fight for what is right, you realize something beautiful. Blood doesn't make a family. Loyalty, love, and sacrifice make a family. I lost the people who shared my last name, but I gained a community. I gained a purpose. And I made sure that my son's legacy would outlive the greed of the people who abandoned him. I walked back to my car, the sun warming my face. For the first time in a very long time, I was excited for tomorrow. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. It wasn't an easy one to tell, but it's one I felt I had to share. Going through the darkest period of my life taught me that you can't choose the family you are born into, but you absolutely have the power to choose who you allow into your life moving forward. I hope this resonated with you in some way. I hope it reminds you to hold the people who actually show up for you a little bit tighter and gives you the courage to walk away from the toxic people who only take. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to cut ties with a family member to protect your own peace or the peace of your children? I really want to hear from you. Please share your experiences down in the comments section. We are building a community here, and your stories matter. Now, before you go, I have a special request for the real ones out there. If you are hearing my voice right now, it means you watched this entire video from start to finish. You didn't skip the hard parts. You stood with me until the end. I call you guys the 1% Club. If you are part of this club, I want you to go down to the comments right now and type the letter W. Just a single W for winner. That is our secret code. When I see that W, I know I am looking at someone who understands resilience, someone who knows that no matter how hard life knocks you down, you can always stand back up and win. If my story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It helps this video reach more people who might need to hear it today. And don't forget to hit follow so we can stay connected for the next chapter. Take care of yourselves, protect the people you love, and I will see you in the next one.